Yeah. So Sonya Baumstein is on. She is going to be presented to us about engineering the Pacific, but she is, I think I told you guys a couple weeks ago that I rowed in college at UW, and Sonya was also on the career team there with me. That's how we met. And then she ended up being one of my roommates later in college. And while I went on a very boring path of becoming a lawyer, Sonya is a professional adventurer, which I think is the coolest thing possible. And she does all sorts of amazing things, including some stuff that she's going to talk to us about today and show us. And I'm going to be helping her out with some videos, and she is in her shop. So she's going to be walking around and showing us some of the awesome boats that she creates. So after 5 years of fundraising and lead up expeditions, Sonya made a solo Pacific crossing attempt in 2015. And this is the first presentation where she's going to discuss how she got there, what happened, and what has happened since then. So thanks for being here, Sonya.
Hey, everyone. So this is really interesting for me because it's the first time giving a presentation like this. It's taken a lot of therapy to get here. I'm just kidding. It hasn't. It has. So I guess the story kind of begins with this ocean row, and that kind of started this piece of my life among many pieces that have led into other things. And as Erin stated, I rowed in college. I was actually a recruited athlete to Wisconsin, so I rowed in high school too. And during college, I was hit by a car on summer break, actually. And thankfully that I went to the University of Wisconsin, I had like the best physical therapy for multiple years that you could have. But it was a pretty severe accident, and it basically ended my rowing career, which was a huge bummer for me. And it brings up this topic of identity that I'm going to continue to reference throughout this presentation. So a lot of people have fears around what identity means for them or what transition is in general. And when you are invested in a path, whatever that path may be, changing that path after a period of time is a hard transition. You look for outlets, you figure out ways to communicate that to other people, you talk about it. So this idea of a professional adventurer has changed for me over time. It is something that I still do. It's something that I still have goals around. It's an aspect of who I am. And what professional adventuring looks like is a lot of fundraising, a lot of proving it, not just having to prove it to yourself, but having to prove it to others, which really is every job in general, right? So there's this almost like fake it till you make it, imposter syndrome that sneaks into everything you do, and you have to speak it into reality. So for me, that began with rowing the Atlantic. So in 2011, after about 2 years of fundraising, I used the money from the settlement of the car I had been hit by to buy a boat, possibly, looking back, the stupidest investment that any person could make. I did make. And I used that sight unseen boat that I bought in Europe to row across the Atlantic. And Erin's going to give you a snippet. She's going to show you this first video, and it pulls from a lot of different aspects of that row, short videos. And at the time in 2011, if you can think back, it was more challenging to take video of these aspects. Now it's simple, right? Now, actually, you can stream for short bits if you have the money from the middle of an ocean because you're only using satellite tech. At this time, GoPro had just come out with their first version, their Model 1 version of their camera. So we took some GoPro footage. I was actually on a boat with 3 other men. The journey up to that is its own story in general. So I'm not gonna give you a lot of information around that. I'm just gonna leave this opener video to say that this was pretty much my pitch deck for the 3 years of fundraising and travel and living in my car to build a boat to get to the start of a Pacific crossing. And that Pacific crossing was to be from Japan to San Francisco. And it was originally slated for 2013, and it was bumped to 2015. So in between that, there were other expeditions done in order to prove it, to get more experience, to do these things, ultimately always with this goal in mind of the Pacific crossing. So Erin, do you want to show that video?
They're seeing it, right? They're hearing it.
Yeah.
I'm Sonya Baumstein. Next year I'm going to row solo 6,000 nautical miles across the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. So that's a quick and dirty summary of what I had to do leading up to that. And along the way, you discover all these things. Basically, any goal that you can have, I don't know how the rest of you do it. For me, it's a function of kind of speaking it into reality. So prior to the ocean row, I said, okay, I'm going to do this 10,000 mile expedition. It's going to start with an Atlantic crossing. I don't know how I'm going to do that Atlantic crossing, but I'm going to get there. And then after the Atlantic crossing, I am going to bike from Mexico to Seattle. Then I'm going to get in a sea kayak in Seattle, and I'm going to paddle up to Juneau, Alaska. And then after that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a southbound, so that starts in Washington, PCT hike. I got to 3 out of 4, which isn't bad over a period of years. And after I stepped on land, after 56 and change hours in Barbados, after leaving from the Canary Islands, I thought that I would literally never step foot even into the ocean again. I never wanted to see salt water again. Ocean rowing is the most challenging thing in the world for me. It's something that drives me to think about my place in the world. It is a momentous thing because you have no control over anything but your mind, really. And in 30 seconds, you saw in that snippet, you saw a lot of positive things. Just think of the highest highs that you can experience in life. Birth of a child, success in business, having grandchildren, perhaps, like these moments that are sealed in your mind forever. And then also think of the lowest lows, these periods where you're like, there's no possibility that I can wake up tomorrow and do this. That kind of buoying is repeated, I don't know, 15 to 30 times a day. Typically when you do ocean rows in groups, so I did that first crossing with 4 people, you sleep in shifts. So somebody is always rowing. It's 2 hours on, 2 hours off is what we did that crossing in. There's a lot of variety around it. But with that kind of time frame, you are basically paddling night and day. So I would just break it down into shifts to get through it, just thinking I have 3-day shifts, I have 3 night shifts, because it's consumable. If you think too far ahead, it's emotionally exhausting. So you really have no other choice but to live in that moment. That is the buildup. That's the identity. That's what you've driven towards. And for most people, they think it's solely about this ocean row. The ocean row is the result of 2 years of hope and saying this thing is going to happen, and disappointment, and all the things combined. During that planning period, I met somebody who was to become my business partner in my rowing boat company. He was actually my first sponsor. He sponsored me with medical equipment. That medical equipment's like $7,000 for any ocean crossing. It just has a lot of different stuff in it. And he's also a really huge character in this story of my Pacific crossing. So after getting done, and I'll reserve some time for Q&A, and I actually have my expedition boat here that I'll show you guys in person, and this new boat that I've been working on. But after finishing that, I then dove headfirst into this bike. And at the time of the bike, which I discovered I actually don't like road biking that much, to be quite honest. I really have a deep, dark hatred for riding hills. I do like suffer sports though, and that's what all these are. So there's an aspect of me that really still loves cycling. It's just really deep inside of me. So we took the wrong route going into the wind up the PCH, the Pacific Coast Highway. And we started at the Mexican border. This again was with totally new people that I found who were willing to do this next thing with me. It was fully loaded cycling. So that is bike packing, where you carry everything on your bike that you'll need. We obviously would eat food at different places, but it's your camping gear. It's like one set of clothing. And that was about a 2.5 month trip. When I got to Seattle, I actually had never sea kayak before. So now we're in a whole new pitch. I lived with, for about, I want to say 8 weeks, a friend of both Aaron and mine's, Tegan, in Seattle. It was my first time being in Seattle. I now live in Port Townsend, Washington, and work out of Seattle. I'm about 2 hours away from that location where my shop is and my life. And I learned how to sea kayak in Seattle. And at the time, everyone is saying, it's pretty odd that you would start with a fully loaded kayak, which is where you carry everything on board again, to go 1,800 miles up to Juneau, Alaska for your first sea kayak. And I said, I hear you, but I'm going to do it anyways, because this is my identity. My identity is to execute things that I say or think that I can do. And I learn along the way, and it's a lot of the fun of it. So up to this point, I've always had partners. I've actually met a person on that cycle who reached out to me before the kayak and said, could I join you? And I said, yeah, I just actually got some sponsorship. I have 2 kayaks. So if you want to come with me, that's great. I would love to have a partner. So again, I'm not solo in any of these journeys yet. So I decide I'm kayaking up. It's happening. We've got to leave. I think we left around June 10th for that trip. This person, I'm 5'4". I don't know how many of you have kayaked before or been in a sea kayak. People who are shorter, it's a lot easier for. It's less strain on the body. You have a lower center of gravity. Everything feels a lot better. This person that came with me kayaking was 6'6". To say it was a challenge for him, the power outage, not a challenge. He could really kick it into high gear, and there was no chance that I could catch up with this 6'6" man. However, it didn't feel great for him. So there were a number of rescues that I had to perform along that way. And to give you background, I did grow up paddling in rivers. It was just whitewater. It wasn't open ocean. But I'm from Florida. I sailed, I rowed, and I had medical background prior to getting into that, wilderness first responder, wilderness EMT stuff. So perhaps it was misplaced confidence that I could save people, but I did. I rescued him like 4 times. And we got to a point mid-Canada where I said, hey, is this your identity? Is this something that you actually want to do? And he said, you know what? I thought it might be, and I do not want to do this anymore. So we took a little sidebar, went to this island, and on that island, there was a person who was generally my age at the time and said, actually, if he doesn't want to do it, I'll continue up with you to Canada. Or I'm sorry, to Alaska. And I said, okay, great. This is awesome. So took a quick hiatus, got him in the boat, in the other kayak, and then we kept going. And this was a person that was an experienced sea kayaker. It was another man. Unfortunately, I haven't done one expedition with a woman yet, and hopefully Erin will commit to one soon. However, we got to the northernmost part of Canada, which was about, I want to say 200-300 miles south of the end point, and for the expedition itself. And he had I don't know what else to call it other than a come to Jesus moment. And in that come to Jesus moment, we had pretty rough water that day, and he ended up capsizing, flipping over, but he didn't want to call for me. I was a little bit ahead of him. So I look back and I see him in the water. Didn't have any signal. I came over, I rescued him, I got him back into the boat, and all of the stuff that had fallen out, because you're fully loaded. So you've got all of your gear split between 2 kayaks to camp on beaches. This is really remote areas. Coast Guard can't rescue you there. There is C-100 options, like planes that can get there, but really like Coast Guard's few and far between. So he said, I need a break. And I said, I get it. Let's go to a beach. Let's take a break. And that was like this moment that he had a break in this identity that he had associated with sea kayaking, this thing that he really loved to do, but he had really only done for like a day or a weekend. He had never been in a place of true fear, of loss, of not knowing what to do. And at that point, he looked at me and said, I am getting off at Prince Rupert. I can't do this. This is not for me. And I made a decision about my identity at that moment that said I was going to finish what I had started doing, even though that meant solo. And that is kind of a scary thing. You don't realize what you're committing to because you haven't done it before. You have no idea what that looks like in that form, to be by yourself for weeks. And it's really weird. To say that it's not weird. I mean, even living by yourself can be kind of weird at times, you know, but then the full responsibility over your livelihood and the decisions you make and where you go and accidents you have really started at that point for me. And now Erin's going to show you a second video that shows you one moment of me talking to camera and making decisions and telling you how I made those decisions on a morning before I launched. I was about 3 days outside of Juneau at that point to paddle. And there'll be some distortion on this video
if you see
because
that little indentation in the grass, that is where my boat was. I pulled it up that high because we're close to the new moon, which means spring tides, which means there's a lot of water that comes up. The tides get much higher and much lower. There's more of a disparity between heights, so you can't really judge when you show up on shore according to the previous night's tide line. Which means at night, you see that little seal out there? At night you have to drag your boat up at low tide all the way up to there. And then in the morning, to catch the flood tide, you have to drag your boat all the way back down there. So now, my shoulders are pretty sore from doing this every day, but I stopped with enough time last night to get it done properly. The past 3 nights, I've been pulling up to a campsite that's okay at 20 minutes past sunset, which makes me have more anxiety, makes the whole process a lot harder. So last night I just decided this looks okay. I can indeed drag my boat this far. So instead of going to that island over there, I decided to camp here and got a great night's sleep. And now I'm catching a little bit above the low tide because I don't want to drag my boat that far in the morning. So I think I'm about an hour and 20 minutes after absolute low, which is totally fine. And hopefully going to camp at a spot called Sand Spit tonight because of the sand beach. And it feels like there's a bit of a southerly wind today, so I might be able to sail. Check out this sail that I built. I've only gotten to use it once for about 15 minutes so far, so I'm excited about the chance to use it again. And I'm about 2.5 days out from Juneau. Alright, check in soon.
So at that point, I had been paddling alone for about, I want to say 2.5 or 3 weeks. And I'd kind of gotten into emotion. But then again, that's like, you're living the identity of being in that boat. And that's actually my favorite, I think, expedition that I've ever been on. And a lot of it had to do, which I didn't realize at the time, with people. It's these connections you make. It's these moments that you share. It is being able to look at someone and say, that was fantastic, or this is horrifying. And the companionship that comes out of it and the things that people offer you when you are coming from a place of something that they're used to. A boating lifestyle is very much the inside passage. It's humble. It's people seeing a person sharing in something that they love to do. And I can't tell you how many times somebody threw me a salmon, which actually a gentleman I met prior to leaving for the paddle said to me, I said I was going to take some fishing gear to catch salmon runs happening. And he said, you won't need that. And I was like, why won't I need that? And he said, well, you're a woman in a kayak, so people are going to throw you fish. And by God, he was totally right. I was so sick of salmon by the end of that paddle that I wouldn't even take pink salmon anymore. There's no chance I would take chump. I would eat king salmon. I'd eat silver salmon, but not the lower grade stuff anymore. And it started to get more nuanced, like canned, like people would can their own salmon, and that was really good, or smoked salmon. In the beginning it was, and there's other YouTube videos if you guys want to watch me literally putting fresh salmon roe into my mouth, which is horrifying. I would not suggest anyone do it. It was disgusting. But by the end of that paddle, when I landed in Juneau, it was committed. Like, I had already started talking to people. I was doing the Pacific. I was going to do the Pacific no matter what. I knew that I didn't want to do it solo. I knew I wanted to have this companionship aspect that made it feel like a more fulfilling life, because you are living these mini lives over and over again. Each one becomes a part of your identity. Each one is its own identity. And I had a partner who was committed to it. Her name was Leah. She, by all accounts, was a really solid partner. And the summary of our story together is that maybe 6 months, 8 months before we were supposed to go over, she's like, nah, I'm not going to be your partner anymore. It was already a really tough sell, by the way, for Americans. Americans are not the same as it comes to funding as Europeans are. In pitching, you've got to have a lot of marketing collateral. Like that in itself, you're a brand. So you're creating a brand around yourself, and you have to wholly believe in this brand. It's running a company basically. So for anybody that's been in a CEO, COO, project management position, you are in sales. This is sales. It's sales, and you are the primary object in that sale. And so I ended up losing a lot of sponsors because it was already a hard pitch, and you guys are not going to believe it, but people don't support women in sport the same way as they support men in sport. So it was already a challenging pitch to say, 2 women were going to attempt to paddle from from Japan to San Francisco. It's 6 months, really at a minute, maybe 5 months. 2 people have done it successfully before, only on their 3rd attempt. We're going to try, that means 3 times they tried and lost boats prior to a successful crossing. And only 2 groups had done it before, 1 solo, 1 was a pair. In the pair, one of the people had tried twice before. So it took a lot to get that funding, longer than I expected. And then I lost half of it the moment that it was no longer a pair, it was a solo. And it happened. This is where Andrew, my very first sponsor, plays back in, because he was a huge aspect in helping me get to the starting line, which is 90% of it. I called him the day that it happened because it felt like I'm having this massive identity shift. Do I even do this anymore? I need a partner. And I wanted it to be a female expedition. I was tired of people saying, yeah, but the men saved you, or expecting that they were the driving force behind these things. So it was gendered for me too. I just wanted this to be a female expedition. And he said, I want you to take time, and I want you to think about this and think about doing it solo. I would be there to support you. I'd be your point of call. He owned a very large business called Remote Medical at the time that did remote medicine for like Antarctica. So he had a support team that could assist. Somebody's Zoom is on, and it's challenging enough for me to keep one train of thought. If they can mute it.
Is it mine? It could be mine.
It could
also,
be
by
yours.
the way, Sonya, we have like 2 minutes left, but.
Oh.
Yeah.
So let me just get to the boat. So I ended up going solo on this expedition, and it didn't go as planned. The weather was terrible. I left not expecting to only have really 12 hours of fair weather. You need 3 days to get offshore, but I took it because I'd been waiting for 6 weeks in Japan after 4 years of planning to get someplace. And after 7 days of terrible weather, this is over 40 knot winds, my weather router said, you're going to experience a typhoon. It's going to be at least 75 knots. Everything that he had told me prior to that had been maybe 50% higher winds than he expected. So now we're looking at like probably 80 knot to 100 knot winds within 7 days of shore. And historically, that hadn't been a good thing for any expedition. And we're talking about a boat that I am going to flip my screen and show you, that took me a year to build with a team. This is all carbon fiber. And it was about $200,000. So this is a $200,000 potential loss, while I'm considering all these other things that potentially could go wrong within absorbing 100 knot wind when I'm only about 150 miles offshore. And I called Andrew. My father basically said, Sonya, take some time and think about it. You have about 400 million followers at this point through your sponsors, a thing I never want to have again, to be quite honest, which is why I became an accountant. And take a beat. I called Andrew and said, I just have this crazy feeling. I can't identify what it is. I don't know why I have this feeling, but it feels like I shouldn't be doing this right now. And every other time I've had this intuitive feeling, I put myself in a really bad situation. He told me a story about Aconcagua and having hiked up to the top of it. Pardon? And the fact that he decided for a reason that he shouldn't continue that hike. and his team members went ahead without him. He didn't have any bearing for the reasoning, and they all lost about 3 fingers from hypothermia. So at that point, I said, I'm no longer doing this journey. I came back in. Afterwards, the spin out from that was massive. Just think of internet trolls times 1 million contacting everyone. And at that point, I severed an identity. That identity felt like I couldn't ever do this again. It was not something that I wanted to do again. And it took me time. And I've now built 8 other boats for other people who wanted to do that. And now I think I'm going to do another one. And you guys are getting a first look at the boat I'm going to do another little thing in. I just built this. So this is my next little rowboat. It is a coastal cruiser that can hold about 800 pounds. It has 2 rowing positions and a cabin that is not very well lit. So you're not going to be able to see inside well, but it's all carbon fiber and it weighs about 140 pounds. So this summer, I'm going to take this little guy up to Alaska. And to wrap all this is to say, like anything in life, there are many identities that you can have. There are moments where you make decisions to shift those identities, but they don't have to leave you completely, and they don't have to be something that you look back on negatively. And it took a while to get here to be able to say that, because ending the Pacific early was like losing an identity. It's not to say that I won't ever do it again. I just got to get my feet wet. So I'm going to end that here.
Thank you so much, Sonya. So people can stay on if they have questions and if you have a few minutes too, but I wanted to let you know that our club makes a donation in honor of all of our speakers to the Rotary Foundation, which supports polio, the eradication of polio, I should say. So we'll make a donation in your honor for that. And thank you for speaking to us today and showing us your amazing boats and talking to us. Yeah, so if people have questions, ask questions, or other ways, if you've got to get going, you can jump off.
Oh no, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
What will happen to the green boat? Is that going out for sale, or are you?
Well, in an ideal world, stay with me on this one. I meet a partner, a life partner, who also wants to do this horrifying thing, which is ocean rowing. But either way, I'll find someone, and I'd like to do a crossing to Hawaii in the next few years.
That could be like your honeymoon, crossing to Hawaii.
Exactly. Honestly, I would probably do it prior to the honeymoon. There's been actual divorces that have happened on the ocean. Couples have ended, and they've gotten off and been like, bye. There's also been 2 couples that have gotten engaged on an ocean row. So, but the percentages lie with divorce rather than marriage.
Any other questions?
And I can go out and show you guys more of that boat.
Oh, I think, Jackie, you're talking, but you're muted. There you go.
Are you an accountant now? Accountant?
I am. I do that on the side. I work for Seattle Choruses. I'm the director of finance there, and I also do cryptocurrency accounting because it's fun. So I can just like walk you guys down it. So it's all solar. Solar goes to DC battery system. There's a desalinator on board. That is a solar powered fan, because inside of these hatches, this is the primary sleeping cabin. It gets extremely hot and moldy. And so you end up getting pretty sick from the mold if you don't constantly clean. I don't know what it looks like inside right now. Oh, it's not so bad. So this is the interior. This is kind of like the full motherboard of electronics. And this is where you stay when you're on sea anchor or anything else. I primarily use that cabin for storage. And each one of these hatches on deck is individual watertight. So every one of them was filled with food or backup water. So for every system on board, there's at least 2 backups for the most part. In case one fails and the next fails, you have a third. I also have a life raft with this life raft. This is essentially a life raft, right? That I'm just pulling and rowing through space and time.
Do you know what, to me, the coolest thing when you were doing the Pacific crossing attempt was that it said the closest humans to you would be in like the International Space Station.
Yeah, it's a really wild feeling. And to trail onto that, which I can't make this up, but now that the US military has admitted that there are UFOs in the middle of the Atlantic, this was not hallucination. I was totally hydrated. I was perfect. No drugs were involved in this. And I had a rowing partner that saw the same thing. We saw something. It was not a satellite. You can actually you see the passing of satellites and they move at a different speed. You see the passing of stars. So star rise and set is wild, and it changes over months. So you have different constellations that show up at different times, which is really cool. And you can look at it and go, I want to steer 30 degrees for the next 4 hours off of Orion. Things like that start becoming normal. And there was one day where these lights showed up and they zigged and zagged around really high up at star level. And I couldn't account for it, and neither could my partner. So either we were having a mutual hallucination, which I don't think is a real thing, or there was something else. So I'm just gonna leave you guys with that weird tidbit. Is there any other questions that you guys had about the boat or anything else?
Are you constantly training and constantly rowing, or is there, and I'm assuming there's a ramp up period prior to this, or how does that work?
I mean, how do you prepare for any suffer? Suffer is suffer. So I do kind of ramp up to an extent. I have very weak ankles though, so I just broke my ankle. I had been rowing for a couple of months to get ready for Alaska, but after about 2 to 3 weeks of suffer, your body gets used to it again. So it's not like do it now, do it later. There are people who start sleeping in shifts prior to ocean rows, but it makes no sense to me because it's valuable sleep you're losing. And actually, the biggest problem with shift rowing instead of doing longer stuff. So the one thing I did like about being solo that I would choose to take through to a pairs row would be longer shifts, like 4 to 6 hours. It's a lot easier to deal with that. And then you get a full sleep cycle. Your joints and muscles start degenerating so much faster when you're only getting really an hour and a half of lucid dream state sleep. Hurts a lot more. By the end of the Atlantic row, I couldn't unbend my elbows or close my hands or really stand up straight because I lost all the like hamstring musculature. So it was 6 weeks before I could close my hands without it being really painful, like turn a doorknob. So there's just things that you can do. And a lot of it has to do with sleep.
How long did the Atlantic row take you?
That was like 57 days.
Okay.
It was more like 56 days, 9 hours and 23 minutes, but like who's counting?
Were you ever in danger with wildlife or anything, that in the water?
Here's the thing about danger. It's all perceived in the time. So really, the danger is more like annoyance or excitement. So danger translates into different things. Annoyance or excitement is typically it. So we did have a marlin following us for a while, and they are known to spear these boats, which the spearing itself isn't an issue. It's like the sinking factor that's the issue of where they spear, because these boats, you're typically moving on depressing days below a knot, and then on psych days, maybe 4 knots. So you're going slow and it creates its own ecosystem below it. You have small things, barnacles, etc., that start forming on the bottom of the boat that you get underneath and scrape off. You're also a shadow, and a shadow creates a natural space for smaller fish to hide, which naturally brings larger fish. So we had a tiger shark that came up at one point, but we were just so psyched to see anything that we were like filming it and putting our hands in the water, which is very confusing looking back. There's some of those videos online under, I think it's Sonya Baumstein on YouTube. You can see some more like little short videos of things over the years, and I've been bad at posting there, but I need to get better. And then the real and present danger are always like your critical systems ending. So this was a challenge in not knowing a boat well and not knowing how to completely wire a boat. Now I know how to wire these boats completely because I've wired a lot of them. And I want to say it was 4 to 5 weeks out from land on the Atlantic row, we started losing power. We couldn't diagnose it. We finally diagnosed it was, in fact, the batteries, because the charge controllers from our solar panels that trickle charge the batteries had gotten wet. They were in the battery hatch, which is very confusing layout for any boat, which I have since amended. And so our batteries were dying, which meant we could not turn on our water pump. And all of the men on board freaked out because everybody loses their actual minds on this row. Just think of true insanity. You're so emotional. Everything is so emotional all the time, unless it's either great or it's horrible or you're asleep. Like those are the feelings. And they wanted to call it 3 weeks out, and I was like, I will row this damn boat in myself, because we have a hand pump, but the hand pump itself is like sadomasochism at its finest. Like, you've got to get that pump out to create water for yourself, but it takes 20 minutes to pump a liter of water, and you have 2 hours off to sleep, to eat, to clean, to fix things, and then you're back rowing again. So for me, that manifested as true laziness, and I got kidney stones afterward, of course, from not making enough water because I was too lazy. So this all goes back. This is like, the story becomes that we hand pumped water for 3 weeks, which is emotionally exhausting to think about ever doing again. I have many more backup systems.
Are you going to write a book?
I don't know. It's kind of exhausting.
I think that'd be easy compared to what you've been through.
You would think, I don't know. It's funny how all of it develops, right? I actually majored in Chinese art history, and then I got a master's in nonprofit management, thinking that I'd go into museum works. And I actually love engineering. And accounting just kind of happened because I like engineering. So it's become a lot about building these boats and helping other people. Like, the next small boat I build of this boat is going to a woman who's going to do the Great Loop. She's a Canadian woman, but the border's been closed for 2 years. For a year, and then before that she couldn't make it. So she is going to row with her dog down the Mississippi, out into the Atlantic Ocean, around Florida, back up to the St. John's River or St. Lawrence River in Canada. I mean, you get to meet all these really cool people doing really cool things. And the last client I built a pink boat for. His name is Tez Steinberg. You can find him online. He just rode to Hawaii. So
I don't think I've ever been more intrigued to not do something in my life. It's amazing how crazy it is, but I have no interest in ever doing that.
Look, like, it just gives you a perspective on life that you could almost never have otherwise.
Amazing.
It's wild. I don't know how to describe it except to say that. Like, addictive.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, and thanks everyone for staying on a little extra. And yeah, so I can't remember next week we have no meeting because it's Memorial Day, but we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. So thanks again,
Sonya.
Sonya.
Yes.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.